Hey everyone, Will Brink here, brinkzone.com. Topic I want to cover today, hopefully briefly, because I always say that and then they go on longer than I expect, is the carnivore diet. I've actually been getting a lot of questions about that one, or asking my opinion about carnivore diets. Unusually so, more than more so than I think any other diet that I can recall in a long time. So just seems to be a spike of interest and questions I'm getting about carnivore diet. So I'm going to put that out, give my basic thoughts on it with a little bit of a background discussion here that I think sort of to put it in context, hopefully to help sort of see the context here. So for those of not, I think most people watching this probably know, vague, at least more or less what the carnivore diet is, more or less exactly as it sounds. It is basically exclusively an all meat diet. In its, I guess, purest form, most extreme form, whatever you want to call it, it's really meat, water, and salt, apparently. There are, like other diets, for example, keto diets. Now, remember, carnivore diet is by default a keto diet, but it's not the classic keto diet, but it's still going to be a ketogenic diet. But anyway, like the keto diet, there are some levels of it. There are some different approaches people may take to carnivore diets, but I'd like to say in its sort of purest form, they're quite specific about the types of meat, basically, like I say, water and salt. And my initial my initial response, of course, now it's been around a few years now, as far as at least in terms of popularity, making a lot of traction. My initial response to it was complete rejection. Just that's about the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Pretty much was my initial response, and I try not to be that way, but sometimes something that overly simplistic, and and that and just some of the claims, and again, some of this was my own fault in that some of the claims people were making in favor of carnivore diets and such sort of biased my opinion of it, getting past their claims, many of which are false, or for example, saying that some, not all, but again, some people, pushers, purveyors of carnivore diets will make claims like, fiber or vegetables are bad for you or something like that. And that, of course, is nonsense. So I think what happened to me, and probably has happened to some other nutritional scientists or researchers or whatever, who have looked into kind of the first thing you come across is some of the claims made, which really turns you off in terms of getting past that and just looking at the diet itself. So on the face of it, obviously the carnivore diet really flies in the face of quote unquote established nutritional recommendations, nutritional science, and so forth. And so the initial response to it, as you might expect, is negative, very negative. But again, we have to, this is where I'm trying to add a little context before I give my basic opinion. A lot of nutritional science, nutritional quote unquote facts, and nutritional understandings, many of them are really getting turned on their head in the last, there's no like line in the sand, but 5 years or something. But in the last few years, whatever, there has been a lot of and remember what is nutritional dogma, nutritional recommendations and stuff are very, very slow to change as far as like mainstream medical groups, nutrition groups, and so forth, as far as they're going to be very slow to change any of their recs or like I said, also once they make a recommendation, once they have a hard recommendation to eat more of this and eat less of that and something, it's really difficult for them on various levels to change. If for no other, they don't want to have people say, well, what do you mean you changed your mind? For the last 50 years, you've been telling me, limit red meat. And so now you're telling me not to and stuff. So you have to understand there's absolutely a human variable in there as far as resistance to changing their recommendations. Yes, they will try to say that they're not, they're waiting for more data, or there's not enough science to change their mind. And sometimes that's true, but a lot of times it's not. It is just sheer human resistance to wanting to admit that, based on now, that's science changes. See, science changes when new data comes out, and it's supposed to. See, when you hear follow the data or follow the science, sorry, that indicates right there that the science is moving, right? You wouldn't be following it if it wasn't moving. Science, good science changes. And scientists and medical bodies and so forth are supposed to change their recommendations as the science changes. But right off the bat, when you hear follow the science, that means it's moving, right? Otherwise, it should be blindly accept the science. Accept the science. When that's what you would say if the science. Now, there are obviously some things, some topics in science that are not moving. I mean, but even them, even like in the world of physics and stuff, some of the laws. I'm changing topics a little bit, but let me meander here. I think you'll get what I'm saying. But even within some of the really, really established laws of physics, there is some cracks in them where some aspects of them are being questioned and changing a bit. Again, it's not like they're just throwing. I'm not saying they're just throwing whole laws of physics out the window or anything. But I will say that even among really at the esoteric levels of physics, that there is some sort of what again was absolute established physics within those laws are being looked at, questioned, so forth. So my point being, there is, it's really going to be slow to change, even when there's studies and data is challenging these long held beliefs, recommendations of nutrition. And this is going to bring us around to the carnivore diet. I promise you. So there is, the sort of mantra, the hard mantra of limiting saturated fat from meats, limiting meats, high meat intakes, associated with higher rates of heart disease and some cancers and all that. That has been, I'm not going to say debunked, but I'm going to say strongly challenged and questioned. And I'll post some articles underneath this video that I've been following this topic a long time. But I will say that the sort of common established quote unquote facts of nutrition, saturated fat intake, for meat is causes heart disease and so on and so forth. I will tell you that I'm not going to say that's been debunked, but I will say that there is convincing suggestive science that really challenges that, and there's been, and that's getting stronger lately, to be honest with you. So I think that my initial impression, and maybe yours, when you've heard of this sort of carnivore diet, to say, oh my God, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. You're going to kill yourself, so on and so forth, is based on some outdated understandings. Now, where do these understandings come from? Again, I have to give some history and some context here for us to get up to carnivore diets. Remember that almost all of the major dietary recommendations that we work with, for the most part, are based on epidemiological, population-based studies, correlational studies, right? Almost all of them. Now, we'll get to why that is in a second. But the vast majority, again, of these very large data sets that look at populations and how they eat, and then correlate, who they ate more of what or less of what, and the outcomes thereof, i.e. various diseases, not getting various diseases. And that is where, I don't know, I'm going to say 90% of the recommendations come from. And as anybody knows who has taken any epidemiology, has any science background, and all that, knows that there are a lot of drawbacks to this type of research. Now, if that's all you have, well, that's all you have, and you got to use it. I mean, there's not, again, page one of book one, when you go to epidemiology, take an epi course or a stats course or whatever, is that correlation does not equal causation, period. And it doesn't. It doesn't mean it can't, but you're all taught that. And yet we are all sort of then expected to do it with a lot of this epidemiological population-based studies when it comes to a lot of things, including nutrition. Now, again, it's not that you throw them out, but you always have to keep in mind the limitations of that type of research. And now, as time has gone on, as that type of research has gotten more granular, as they are able to adjust for confounding variables, as they call it, get better and better. They get better and better data from those types of studies, and they can, eliminate a lot of the co-founders out of those studies, and so that they got pretty good. And sometimes some people we might say, well, whether smoke there's fire, and if one association keeps coming up over and over and over again, let's go with the most obvious one, smoking, right? For years and years and years, obviously, smoking was associated with increased rates of cancers and other health problems, and no amount of other variables would eliminate that signal. That signal that smoking obviously is a negative was strong and was always there. And I don't think anybody's going to say, well, okay, that was just a correlational data, and maybe smoking doesn't cause lung cancer or whatever. Well, we know it does. So I'm really going extreme here. But in other areas, again, things like that, we sort of meat eating, some other things that sort of were strongly associated, within this type of correlational epi studies. Like I say, as time has gone on, they're being questioned. And I think that we are going to have to change our viewpoint of that and our recommendations of a lot of that. And again, this is moving. Remember, the science is moving. We're following the science. The science is still moving. If anyone out there ever claims or tells you that we have an absolute understanding of human nutrition and stuff at this point, it's absolutely false. We do not. It's surprising what we don't know, to be honest with you. Now, there's a whole lot we do know, and we can make some very strong, definitely can make some strong recommendations and be, declarative on a number of things. But don't think for a second that that new things aren't being learned all the time. And you have to also remember that the actual scientific approach to the study of nutrition is pretty new. This is not old. This is not old stuff. This is actually pretty new as far as applying scientific methodology, to nutrition is actually fairly new. So I mean, even as up to 60s and 70s, I mean, they were really just starting to get into large scale, scientifically validated style nutrition research. I mean, even when I was taking my first nutrition classes, in the 80s, I mean, this was under home ec. The courses I took, these were listed under home ec. These weren't even listed under their own, science designation. They were, at that time, it was home economics. Home ec, like how to bake cookies over here, one class, and then like what's good nutrition in the other. So that was not that long ago. So keeping that in mind, and point two, and then I'll get to my specific opinions of the carnivore diet. Point two is, people might be asking, and understandably, especially if you have a little bit of a science background, say, well, why have we been why do we rely so heavily on these epi studies, these correlational studies? Why aren't we, so why don't we just jump to the good stuff, Will, and do, controlled studies? Why don't we actually do controlled feeding studies and get to the bottom of this, because that's where you're going to get your answers, right? Really. And the answer to that is, it's really difficult to do studies like that with human beings. Human beings are really hard to control. They don't like being locked in a hotel room or a hospital ward or something for weeks or months on end, to control everything they eat, follow them around all day, see everything they're doing. control all the variables. This is very expensive. It's very difficult to do. And again, there is grades of that, of course, where you go from, let's say, epidemiological, just totally correlational, and asking people, giving them questionnaires to fill out, which are notoriously inaccurate, to highly controlled metabolic ward stuff. That's sort of the gold standard, to stuff in between. I mean, there's a lot of in between that you can do where you are partially controlling, like you're giving them food to take home to eat that. And then they've got to come back and, tell you how much of it did they eat. I mean, there are levels of how much control you can put into these studies, and you can get some really good answers, much more confident answers as to actual outcomes, positive outcomes, and accurate outcomes, versus not knowing if it's just correlational. But the bottom line is what I'm saying is that you were asking, I'm sure you're wondering why, in the last 50 years or 70 years of research, why don't we have more controlled studies with human beings to answer these questions? And the answer is because it's really difficult to do, and it's really expensive. And like I say, people say, well, it's like herding cats. It's nothing like herding cats. It's like herding cats, ostriches, dogs, elephants, and fish, all of which have an opinion and can sue you if you do them any harm. You have to get, at least in the Western nations, and I don't know about China or someplace where they can, maybe they can throw a bunch of people, in a cell and feed them what they want and something. But anyway, in Western nations where you have an IRB, which is basically a panel that you've got to go and submit to them your protocol, and they've got to approve it for being safe and ethical and all that. It's not easy to do, to get these studies done. So to answer your question, I know people are, it's frustrating because, of course, I want to see, we all want to see, controlled studies, and there are more of them. Now, here's where I'm coming around full circle before I answer this question. We are getting more controlled studies. Some of these controlled studies, where now they actually are controlling exactly what people eat, do not live up to the correlational studies, i.e., like feeding people meat. Many times, a lot of studies, and there's one I'm going to post underneath, does not find any metabolic problems. They don't find increases in LDL. They don't find a whole lot of negative, any particular changes in negative metabolic outcomes or weight gain or what have you, in addition of meat. So I will say to put one thing out there for you, because I know it might seem I'm not giving great answers. One thing I will say is that eating meat onto itself is not inherently a negative. Okay, meat itself is not inherently bad for you. Full stop. Okay, so anybody that says otherwise, via vegan propaganda or whatever, meat onto itself is not a negative. Human beings are omnivores. We are actually probably the most successful omnivores on the planet, which is why we are so successful. It means that human beings can eat damn near anything and survive, sometimes even thrive. Hence why you can have vegans and you can have carnivores, and yet both of them claim that they are, thriving and surviving and doing great. But I will say that a lot of the actual controlled studies that have been done and are coming out many times are not in line with what the correlational studies find, and a lot of that times does have to do with meat. Okay, so now with all that, carnivore diet. So the carnivore diet, as I said, kind of in its purest form, appears to be basically eating just meat, water, and salt. But there's, they do allow some things. Again, depends on who you ask and all that. And my opinion of it is this: as an elimination diet, and what's elimination diet is just as it sounds. You're eliminating basically everything you can to eat as simple as you possibly can, in the hopes to eliminate everything maybe that is causing you issues, whether it's autoimmune stuff, whether it's GI issues, energy, whatever that may be. The carnivore diet is an excellent elimination diet because it's about eliminating, like I say, so I don't think you get much simpler than that. And to that end, I will say that the feedback from people that have used it as an elimination diet has been very positive. More so than I think could be coincidence. It's been the number of people, like I say, who have found that carnivore diet has really improved, like say autoimmune issues they had, various GI issues, arthritis, a whole bunch of things, is too consistent to be to not have something going on there, to just say it's strictly placebo or psychological. A number of them happen to actually be vegans. There's a whole site, a group on Facebook that it's mostly, not all vegans, but it's mostly vegans who, when they were vegan, basically felt it destroyed their health and went carnivore, which talk about a 180, but anyway, went carnivore and found almost completely, not everyone, but everyone that I've read has found that the carnivore diet really improved and eliminated all sorts of problems they were having. So I think as a elimination diet, as a sort of a medical diet, quote unquote, I think the carnivore diet could be worth a try. I'm almost tempted to try it myself, honestly, just as sort of a test run to try it. I'm not trying to necessarily eliminate the things that we were talking about, but I have to admit, I'm actually pretty curious. I've never been very curious about keto diets, which, you guys, are much usually, they're higher in fat, lower in protein. The carnivore diet is going to have a different ratio. Obviously, you're going to have a very high protein intake. I guess probably a moderate fat intake. I don't remember what the ratio is. Obviously, depends on how much the fatty cuts of meat you eat and all, but you need energy, and they do recommend eating fatty cuts of meat with a carnivore diet, not eating lean meat, because you can't just eat lean meat exclusively. I am actually curious, and from that perspective, and who knows, maybe I'll try it sometime. So I think from as an elimination diet, I think for a lot of people it's probably worth a try. Now, my real issue at this point with the carnivore diet is long term. It goes against a couple of things for me. One. I really try to advise people. I'm not a fan at all of any diet that is temporary to get an effect and then go back to your normal way of eating. Every time people do that, statistically speaking and so forth, you're going to, whatever benefits you got, whatever weight you lost, it's all going to come back. Anytime you see someone go on X diet, very strict diet, and then go back to their normal way of eating, whatever that may be, it never works out. Okay. My advice has been consistently, you need to find a way of eating that you can eat for the rest of your life. This is your new normal. And it's how to be healthy for you. It can't be extreme. Obviously, you have to be able to live a life and so on and so forth. And so my issue with the carnivore diet, as with keto diets, as with a lot of diets, is this something that you're going to be able to follow for the rest of your life? And I am very doubtful about that, as I am with keto diets, even vegan diets. Up to 80% of vegans, I think it's about 80%, go back to eating meat. Okay, so vegan is not a successful long-term diet approach for a lot of people. Now, they might have different reasons. I don't know why most vegans go back to eating meat again, and maybe there's studies out there that ask them. Maybe it's health related. I don't know. But anyway, anything that is kind of way in the extremes that's difficult to follow, may also have health related problems, you're not going to probably stick to, and therefore anything like that's always going to get a no from me up front. So 2 issues: can you stick to carnivore forever, and is it going to be healthy for long term? I think short term you'll be fine, if you do carnivore. But again, I think if you did carnivore, again, trying to address some of those medical related things, and it works out for you, fabulous. And then, typical of other elimination diets, then what you start to do, as you keep a very strict log, you want to control this very carefully, then you start to add foods back in and see how you respond to them. And by doing that, you can really narrow down what foods it was you were eating in the past that were causing your issues. And done right, and maybe that's a different video, but done correctly, an elimination diet like carnivore, and then doing that can cure or greatly improve whatever foods you were eating that was causing your problems. So back to the long term. So the issue with carnivore is, are you going to be able to eat that way for the rest of your life, both mentally, physically, financially, and medically? So is it going to be good for you? I mean, are lots and lots of diets. People feel great and say all sorts of wonderful things the first 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, whatever. But as time goes on, nutrient deficiencies and such will start to creep up. Take some in some things it can take quite a while to deplete your levels of, let's say, in vegan B12 if they're not taking B12, what have you. So the if you're going to you try carnivore and you like it and you plan to stick to it, you absolutely must get regular labs to see what it's doing to you internally and metabolically. Okay, if you're going to follow a carnivore, any diet, but I mean extreme diet, but if you're going to follow any diet that's way outside, let's say a balanced, quote unquote, balanced omnivore's diet, and you need to get labs. And keto or carnivore, especially, if I was going to go on it longer than say 3 months, 4 months, and you plan to stick to it because you like it, you need to get labs and get full, lipid panels, hormone panels, A1C, really get the full panel done and see what it's doing to you metabolically. Now, if you feel good and your labs are good, well, then I really can't say anything, too negative. I mean, there's lots of people eating all kinds well, of course, there's a standard American diet or SAD, where people are obviously metabolically in terrible condition. I have also seen, again, people on keto and vegans and stuff metabolically in terrible shape in their labs, and sometimes they're like, wow, I didn't know that, and sometimes they just don't want to hear it, and sometimes they just go into denial and don't do anything about it. It is a sort of, now this is also the keto is in here too, but let's go with carnivore. There is also a group sort of in the carnivore subset that also deny that lipids and cholesterol and all that have any bearing on heart disease, and so that's how they get away. They say, "Oh yeah, my total was 400, my LDLC and ApoB was 350, but they don't have anything to do with heart disease, so I'm not going to worry about it." Okay, it's your life. I'm not even going to get into that because again, that's another topic. And yes, there is even again some studies that question the value of some of those numbers, but in my view, that's a bit of a moving target because there's a lot of moving parts to that. There's triglycerides, there's insulin levels, there's a lot of moving parts. Any one number is not the end of the world, but LDLC and ApoB are strongly and consistently correlated with your risk of heart disease, and I wouldn't ignore that one. Again, if everything else looks great, I don't know how much you stress about it, but this is a total picture, clinical picture. I will say that I think that though that subset of people on keto and well, maybe vegan, but let's talk again carnivore and keto more. That there's a subset of people that have decided that all of those other factors that we consider important for metabolic health don't matter, and so they're going to ignore it. Well, that I think is a mistake. That would be not recommended by me, but I will reiterate to say that if you try carnivore, you get a good effect from it, you feel good, and you decide you want to stay on it, then get labs. Start, I would say, at the end of your first 12 weeks and maybe another, every 4 to 6 months, just to be sure. And like I say, if you feel good and your labs are good, well, then, metabolically speaking, and you need to get, pretty extensive panels. I mean, I wouldn't just do the simplest labs possible. And again, which labs are another discussion. Then I really am not going to say anything terribly negative about it. I mean, but be clear though, there are no long-term studies on carnivore style diets. There's minimal studies on keto diets, and again, they're conflicting. They're very conflicting. There's no, again, as I said, we continue to see conflicting data that challenges old attitudes and old views of nutrition. But again, correlationally or population speaking, people love to pull out Inuit diets and stuff, and where the Inuit Indians ate basically mostly blubber and animal, and supposedly heart disease is like very rare. But again, there are also individual differences. To sort of close this out, why would one population be able to do that, and let's say maybe somebody else from a whole other area who's generations and generations of eating differently couldn't do that. Well, there's probably genetic factors under there. I don't know if all of those, again, there's more data, more study that needs to be looked at, but there are definitely people, for whatever reason, that can follow a diet, do well, feel well, have good labs, and somebody else can't do it. Again, now, is this because of how they approach it? Maybe. Why do some vegans do really well on vegan diets, and then some people, it literally destroys their health? Is that because of how they approach the vegan diet? I'm sure that's possible. I mean, it's possible. That's part of it. But I still think you can take, a number of people, 10 people, whatever, put them on the exact same vegan diet, and 1 or 2 out of the 10 is not going to do well. Whether they don't feel well, whether they just metabolically don't do well, whether they need greater amounts of supplemental, iron and B12 and so on to do better and so forth. But while people are physiologically similar, they're not identical, right? And so that's what labs do for you. A lot of times, again, I will reiterate this over and over and over again, because I'm always astounded by what people will do to themselves and what they'll put in their bodies and so forth, and not get any labs to have any idea what's going on inside and metabolically. No matter how you don't give me, oh, I felt great. That's not, look, people who take cocaine say they feel great. Obviously it's not good for them. And the problem is that by the time your labs reflect what's going on inside, you've already done damage. So by the time you wait till you don't feel well, or you say, maybe I should get some labs, by the time you've done that, you've done damage. So you should never wait, just go by how you're just feeling on the outside, or in your mind, or to decide on whether something is good for you or not good for you, and how you're doing. And I am just generally disappointed and astounded by the number of people that do not get labs. And that includes, now, back in the day when I worked with, professional bodybuilders and such, these guys and gals, but mostly guys, were spending, substantial amounts of money on various drugs and anabolics and GH and so on and so forth, and not a penny on labs. Now, some of them I know didn't do it because they didn't want to know. They didn't want to see what was going on. And when they were just in denial, and some of them would be honest about it and say, well, I should, but I don't really want to know. But the other ones, I don't think, they just like, I'd rather, I'm fine. I feel fine. Anyway, that's my lecture for today on that. But if you're doing anything like this, even if you're normal and just like eating standard omnivore diet, yeah, you should get labs. I mean, at least once a year, especially as you're, let's say, past 40. But in the extremes, when you're especially getting into changing into a new diet, whether it's vegan, so on and so forth, you're metabolically, adjusting to it, you should know what's going on. So that is my thought on carnivore. If you've tried it, or you're doing it, give me some comments below. If you've had labs done while you were on carnivore, what did you find? How did they come out? I'd like to hear about that too. And I'll see you guys. Let me throw in this because I always forget to do this. Please like this video if you got good information. Subscribe to the page here. And of course, drink your Alpha Joe, because it tastes good, feels good, and it's good for you. See you on the brink soon.